Okay, so good evening. I'll continue with this very difficult topic. I hope I'm not stretching it too much, because there's some very difficult aspects of it. So let's see how it goes. But of course, to always bring it back to compassion, to kindness, that is important. So if you feel you don't get this connection, if that somehow I'm not able to make it clear, then please say so. We'll have question and answers. I also received a question, a very important question by someone that I want to answer, and Perry told me this was a question that was usually asked. So I'm happy to address this today. You may have the same question. It's about how does the scientific method of Buddhism, how does that fit with reciting mantras, doing circumambulations, relying on oracles, all those aspects of Buddhism that seem very superstitious and seem to relate to blind faith? Very important question, and I hope at the time of question and answer that I can answer that. Okay. But to go back to the actual topic, dependent arising or dependent existence, on one hand, explaining how phenomena exist in reality, and therefore through this understanding, when it goes deeper, then our ability to generate sincere care, love, and compassion for other sentient beings. That is the goal, and that's why we're discussing it. However, it is such a difficult topic. So extremely difficult, not because, not difficult to a Buddha, not difficult in itself, but because we have a mind that perceives the opposite. That in terms of a particular characteristic that phenomena have never had, do not have now, and will not have in the future, we perceive the opposite. So our mind is totally immersed in a perception of phenomena that is impossible. And usually we talk about phenomena which is the I, and phenomena other than the I. Just because the self-cherishing, the self-centeredness is such a problem, is such a huge problem. So when we talk about how phenomena really exist, we discuss it from the point of view of the mind and everything else. Because that's how we see the world. I and the rest. And so we say, when we talk about what is the I, how does the I exist? Actually, when we say what is the I, or what is the table, it's quite similar. In terms of the same characteristic that we wrongly perceive the I to have, we also perceive this table to have, and everything else to possess. Now, to give you a sense of that quality, because it's so difficult to understand, what am I talking? What are we talking about here? What is it that does not exist? And what is it that does exist? So today I'd like to start talking about a little bit to give you a sense of that, of what is described as inherent existence. Objective existence, independent existence, existence from the side of the object. Ooh, what does that mean? Existence from the side of the object. Make it a little bit harder. Existence by way of its own character. Existing in and of itself. Now those are everyday kind of words, actually. Those are everyday kind of words, and I'm not saying you're no longer allowed to use them. Oh no, in Buddhism those don't exist, so you can't use them. Of course, on a relative level, when we say independence, right? So Is there anything that exists totally independently? No, that's impossible. And I can still say Singapore is an independent country. Because in relation to a certain political situation, I say Singapore is independent. Is Singapore totally independent of the entire world? No. Oxygen, water, clouds, right? The subtle particles that fly around, there's a constant exchange. So, of course, Singapore's CO2 goes somewhere else and the oxygen comes here, and then Singapore's plant, they give CO2 and give oxygen and so it's this constant, just think from a biological point of view. And of course Singaporeans use Google, so dependence on Google, dependence on the internet, dependence in so many ways, right? Food, oh yeah, of course I forgot. Yeah, no resources. One of the first things I learned about Singapore. So on one hand, food is transported from other countries. Singapore provides other countries with their knowledge, with their expertise. So it's like a giving and taking. So it's an interdependence. And still I say, Singapore is an independent country. Because in relation to certain political situations, it's not that they're governed by Trump, fortunately, right? Not dependent on, or by the Queen of England, for that matter, right? So therefore, it's an independent country. So the word can be used in a relative sense, but in the sense of in the Buddhist sense, totally independent, impossible. Okay, so here we can agree on Singapore is not an independent country, right? It's only independent with regard to the political situation. It doesn't totally exist independently. In fact, nothing exists totally independently. Thank you. Nothing exists totally independently. All right, so let's just leave it that part. Then the next point is objectively. Does anything exist objectively? That's already a little harder. Although, when you understand one, you understand the other. But when we first hear about them, objectively is a little harder. As in we say, oh, let's look at this objectively. Let's look at the situation. Let's take an objective view on that. We can still use that. But is it totally objective? I'm viewing it, and I do so objectively. There's actually a contradiction because I'm viewing it, so I'm subjective. And at the same time, I'm trying to be objective about it. So it's only in relation to not allowing my emotions to be evolved that I say I look at it objectively. So again, I can use that word, but if I use it in the strictest sense, let's consider this objectively. It's then no one can consider it because you're doing so objectively. So you don't need a mind, and so you couldn't consider it. So you can actually not look at something objectively because you always have something that looks at the situation. So you always have a mind involved. And as we've seen or heard in one of the previous, the first class, what is reality is your reality, your reality, your reality. So the summary of everyone's reality, that's reality, isn't it? What I perceive, what you perceive. Do you have a further reality than what you perceive? For you, it's there. For me, there is no further reality than what I perceive at this point. Of course, in the future, I may perceive more, but then only when I perceive it, then it becomes reality for me. Right? The moment I take it to mind, okay, but if I don't take it to mind, I don't even know it exists. So for me, it's not a reality. Does that make sense? So I need consciousness to perceive something, And actually, the things that are true for me are those things that I take to mind. I have to. Okay. And we all have a different, just from our sense perception, we all perceive something slightly different. We have a different background. There's not a single person who's grown up in exactly the same spot, as in like, where I'm standing, someone else is standing, right? So we all have great similarity, possibly in our upbringing, but even if you're identical twins, your experience will always be slightly different. Okay, so it will always be, I have my experience and I can kind of guess what is yours, but in the end, I live in my own world, right? I have no idea what happened this morning when you got up. You have no idea what I did this morning. If you're a couple, maybe you see each other, but then there's always times you're apart, and then still you don't know. I mean, I don't think you cramp it together into the bathroom, at least that. I mean, there are always moments you're on your own. So the point is, in the end, it's a unique experience we all have. So it's always subjective. Now let's take inherent. That's a little harder. So how do we use the word inherent? We take fire versus water. Is it inherent in fire to be hot? Is it inherent in water to be hot? No. So we say it is inherent in fire to be hot, but it's not inherent in water to be hot. Why is it not inherent in water to be hot? Because you need some other factors, maybe a pot or a stove, to heat in the water. So you can make the water hot, but you need something other than the water itself in order to produce hot water. That's why we say it is not intrinsic, it is not innate to, or it is not inherent in the water to be hot. But it is inherent in the fire to be hot. Because you don't need anything else to make it hot. Or do you? Strictly speaking, don't you need oxygen? We need a few things, right? So although in a day-to-day kind of setting you can say, well, fire is inherently hot. I don't say in the Buddhist context it is not, so you can no longer use the word. You could still say Singapore is an independent country, although it actually isn't. You can still say I look at it objectively, though you can't. And you can still say fire is inherently hot, although actually it isn't. It needs other things to be hot. Why do we say water is not inherently hot? Because it depends on something else to be hot. And therefore it's not always hot. Okay. Now fire, surely we would say is hot, but actually if you check, when we say fire is hot, we say it in relation to this body. Because we experience it as hot, so in relation to this body, we say fire is hot. If hypothetically we had a body that would always get cold, close to fire, we would say fire is cold, right? So fire is not in and of itself. That is inherently, independently, right? In and of itself means not in relation to something else. In and of itself means just very self-contained. It is hot, if that was true. But that's not possible. Fire is not in and of itself hot because it is in relation to our body that it perceives it to be hot. It's not burning in and of itself, it's in relation to something that burns. Does everything burn? No, there's material that doesn't burn. So then you could say, oh, fire is not burning because in relation to rock, it's not burning. Right? So it's only in relation to a particular body that we say fire is hot. It is in relation to certain material that we say fire is burning. If it were in and of itself hot, if it was not dependent on the experience of a certain body, then everyone would experience the same heat and everything would have to burn. Right? So this gives us a bit of a sense of what inherently means. That is something inside the thing, and it's totally independent that. Now you may wonder, big deal. Big deal, what do I care? That doesn't make my life better or worse. So again, how could that be beneficial in any way? Now one thing, of course it goes back to the I. It goes back to the self. I have a sense there is something intrinsic here. There's something inherent here that is independent, sometimes dependent, but not fully, right? It's a little bit dependent, but not fully. Okay? And I feel this is so much more important. And this is where my trouble starts. So with the I, it's pretty obvious. But it's so hard to identify the object of negation. So I give you a few examples. Now I gave you an explanation of the words inherent, intrinsic, independent, subjective, in and of itself. Okay. But to give you another example of an example where we can all understand that initially we didn't have a sense there was something coming from the side of the object, and slowly it developed. Okay, I'll give you an example. Where do I start? Let's start with money. Let's start with money. Something very interesting happened in India last year. Well, it wasn't interesting, it was terrible. It was very challenging. But it was very interesting to watch your own mind. Because last year in November, the Prime Minister of India announced that from tomorrow onwards, the money is devalued. All the money is devalued. So 500 rupee notes, 1,000 rupee notes, no longer any value. Yeah. So the piece of paper that previously seemed to say, ooh, 500 rupees, right? If it's like lying on the street, it's almost like it's calling you, pick me up. You can buy this many teas from me. You can buy this many portions of rice and dal from. Pick me up. And then 1,000 rupee notes right next to it. Oh, I'm even more. It's like seeming to come from the side of the object. From one day to the next, no value. So initially it was still screaming, no more value. So this money had no value any longer. And Modi started printing. It was all a secret process, I suppose. They were already printing the new money because there was so much black money on the market. So that's why they decided to devaluate the old denomination and introduce a new one. But in a country of 1 billion people or more, is it 1.3 billion by now? I'm not sure. At least 1 billion people, very difficult to make that happen overnight. So there was no money. Money that had no more value and no money. And slowly those new pieces of money came in, and you would look at them and you go, 500 rupees. Instead of 1,000, they're now at 2,000. Pink piece of paper. It's just a piece of paper, right? Printed by the Indian Mint, which is now labeled, it's called 2,000. But before long, it's like as if it has this value in and of itself. It took a while, like I'm saying. And then at some point at the nunnery that I live in, there's a water filter, and people put money in like a little box thing to clean the water filter every now and then. And one day I opened it to have someone come over to clean the filter, and there were 500 rupees in there. And I was like, yeah, nah. Because they were the old ones. But it was still like, I'm 500. No, you're not 500 rupees. It was the old one. And I could joke, I just put it on the table to see the reaction of the nuns kind of come in. You see, so it was like, at some point, when I first came to India, I guess, when the 500 rupee notes had a value, initially I had to get used to this idea, and suddenly it took on a life on its own. So that life on its own, that was a sense, it's something inherent in that piece of paper that gives it that value. And it's not irrational, it's much more instinctive, it's much more subtle. And there are other examples. I think another example, a good example, is if you vote for a president of a country, right? So let's say Singapore has a new president, a new prime minister. Initially, this person is like, oh, just a guy. Oh, no, not just a guy. It's the prime minister. Oh, okay. Oh, it's the prime. Right? You need to remind yourself. And after a few weeks, it seems he's got like prime minister written on his forehead. Like, you don't need to remind. It's like now it seems to be coming, he's got something prime ministerial about him. Right? He's got some quality about him. Yeah? Actually, one of my teachers, Geshe Kelsang, he once gave the example of like a disciplinarian in a monastery. Like in the big monasteries, or in also the small ones, you always have a disciplinarian. And the bigger the monastery, the scarier the disciplinarians are supposed to be. Because, 1,000 monks or more are difficult to control. So they're usually senior monks with certain special qualities. And then you're scared around them. And so Geshe was explained this situation where there is this, first initially is the new disciplinarian, so you see this person, and you need to remind yourself constantly. Make sure you remember it's him. So when you're doing something that you're not supposed to do, you don't do it in his presence. And then after a while, it's like, you see this person? Fear's right there. You don't need to think. So now it seems this is the disciplinarian from his own side. He's now actually, it's got something within him that makes him the disciplinarian. Okay? And then it changes. The disciplinarian is only the disciplinarian, let's say for 6 months or 2 years, I think it is. And after those 2 years, a new person is appointed, usually by the abbot. And you see the old person, you go, no. Right? So there you get a sense, there's something seems to come from the person. And you need to decondition yourself to get rid of that, to just go, oh, ex-prime minister, or ex-something. And then they stay ex for their whole life, usually. Well, obviously. Okay? But there's really nothing found from the side of the person. There's nothing that I can say, that's the ex-prime ministerness. That's the ex-prime ministerness. I don't even know how to use it. Like, that is the thing that makes him the... No, it's just labeled. In relation to certain qualifications, in relation to the office that this person held, but it's only in relation to something other that I can say, this person is the prime minister or the disciplinarian of a monastery. So you get a sense for that. So the same, where's that I? An I is only used in relation to others. That's it. There's no I to be found. It's only in relation to others that I say I. Okay. And in relation to a certain body, I can say I'm a human. So like I said before, our sense of I is not just I. There's a sense I'm human, I'm a nun, I'm German, It is a relation to, I'm a daughter. Okay, so in relation to my parents, I'm a daughter. In relation to my passport, I'm German. In relation to my body, I'm a woman. In relation to the fact I've taken vows, Getsu vows or monastic vows, I'm a monastic past, I'm a nun. But there's nothing to point at that tells me I'm this, that, or the other. And still I feel I'm so precious. Okay? So this gives you a bit of a sense of what we're trying to identify here. But I want to take it a little bit further. Because we have a sense of an inherent world with regard to everything. With regard to words, with regard to names, with regard to fashion. It's very interesting. Especially it starts with beautiful and ugly, right? So I think fashion is actually a good example. I don't know how it is in Singapore, but I remember growing up in a country where one thing becomes fashionable. Slowly it comes in. Everyone is crazy about it. Everyone buys it. And then that fades away. Have you ever watched your mind with these objects? Initially you see a piece of clothing for the first time and no reaction. And then you see a super slim model who would not survive if she really looked like that. I'm just kidding, that's what I talked about yesterday. But anyway, you see some beautiful person wearing it on a billboard or in a newspaper, in a magazine. You see other people wear it, and slowly, since you see it worn, it's all around you, slowly you start labeling as nice. And then it seems to be beautiful from within. Oh, it's pretty, it's actually beautiful. The more you see it, the more beautiful it becomes. And then you want to have it. It gives you pleasure, so you want to have it, right? And then you wear it for some time, and then new fashion comes in, and you look at it and you go, nah. You think it's ugly. It's no longer fashionable, right? So have you ever noticed how this seems? It's the same piece of clothing. It may even be new. You haven't worn it very often. You washed it once or twice. So it hasn't the object, but it seems as if that which was not beautiful became beautiful, fashionable, highly beautiful. Oh, so unfashionable. Same object. Okay? It's quite interesting how that happens. And I think also names. Can you give me a really unfashionable name? Like a really old-fashioned name. Usually people give me the names of their grandmothers. Okay. Anyone? Like a really old-fashioned name?
Mary.
Mary? That's old-fashioned? Okay, Mary it is. I love it when the Chinese translate. I can't see you, but yeah, hi. So Mary. Okay, so Sonam is suggesting Mary. Anyone else? That's pretty old. We know for sure it's 2,000 years it's been around. So that's pretty old-fashioned.
In the foreign Chinese context, we sometimes use Chinese dialects. So an old-fashioned name for a man could be Asik.
Asik. Asik. Do I say it right?
Yeah.
Asik. Okay, Asik. All right. Right? It seems like Asik. That's like, Asik. Who would call their child Asik, right? If you had a son, would you call him Asik? No. Okay. Anyone would call his son Asik? No, no one. Okay. All right. I mean, as it happens, I once had an experience when I was in Israel. I was in a restaurant, and I was looking through the menu. I wasn't very hungry, and I was there with a friend. And this friend of mine, she was just going through it, and I looked through the names, and I saw this name, shakshuka. I said, oh, that sounds so wonderful. It's such a nice sounding. If I had a daughter, I would call her shakshuka. Now that's like saying, if I had a daughter, I'll call her laksa. Or Hongjian Mi. I had that for lunch today. I had both laksa and Hongye mi. And nasi lemka. So, right? Lemma, nasi lemma. Okay, so if you called your children that, that's what it would be like. So for me, Hongye mi sounds nice. It's not a dish yet. I haven't put the two together yet. So, I mean, if I were really into if I had a child or I had a dog, and I mean, it'd be ridiculous. So shakshuka is a tomato egg dish. So you see, for me, it had a nice sound. Shakshuka, it sounded like a girl's name. Yeah, and for every Israeli, it was hilarious. I mean, you have no idea how many shakshukas I got after that. I had so much shakshuka after I told people about this. But it was such a good experiment I had, because there seemed to be something intrinsically beautiful for me, versus for this person, it was just a national dish, right? So here we get a sense how actually it's just labeled. We learn this is such and such, but it seems to be coming from the side of the object. And that is true for everything. That is true for this table. This is true for a book. All those objects, we've learned to name them, and then they start as if they take on their own life as that object. And what I think is a good reflection of that is like when you watch a cartoon. In cartoons, cupboards have faces and they talk to you. Houses talk to you. Cars are male or female, right? They talk to you. It's very interesting. And actually, in the context of linguistics, I've already talked about it. I did a little bit more research. I don't want to go into all the details, but in some languages, nouns are male, female, or neutral in German. So you relate to certain objects more as feminine, right? So in German, the sun is female. But in other countries, it's male. The moon is male in German, and the sun is female because of the gender of the word, right? We don't just say the. We have three genders. We have der, die, das. 3 words for the. And it depends on which gender the object is. What is it in French? Is the sun is it female or male? It's male? It's male. There you go. So, there you go. So for the French, the sun is male, and the moon is female. For the Germans, the sun is female. And of course, they're right. French are wrong. No, but you see, we relate to an object that, such as the sun, has this nurturing kind of female quality, whereas I suppose for a French person, it's more that powerful. I don't know how you relate to it. It's not necessarily that we do, but there is some subconscious sense in which we relate to things depending on the language. But it somehow seems, when we make the connection, as if that was to take place in and of itself. As if it had nothing to do with me calling it such, because we have a natural sense that phenomena exist in and of themselves. They're like solid and concrete, and it has nothing to do with me calling it such. And that also explains why we see the world around us as concrete as we do. Actually, this world is made of atoms, right? And each atom is 99.9% made of empty space. 99.9% is space. How can I see this so solid? Right? So from a Buddhist point of view, we are so conditioned, our perception of things as intrinsic, solid, concrete, as if you could point at this thing, this is exactly this table, this is exactly that, as if it was able As if it were to define itself. I didn't have to define it. It's already defined, and I just perceive it as such. This is how things appear to me. So when I look around, yes, it's a shrine. It's a shrine with lots of statues. Those are pictures. I don't even have to think. Right? So I have a sense that everyone sees the same as I do when I walk into this room. But if you heard stories of people who were blind since birth and then who gained their sight again through surgery, there have been some cases. So I remember one particular case, I saw a documentary about this girl who was blind since birth, and then whatever had caused her blindness was removed, and she couldn't see anything. I would have thought she just walks into the room, she sees a cupboard, she sees a table, she just walks. No, she would bump into things all the time because she hadn't learned to categorize things the way we have. To know this is a table, there's this much distance between these objects. I don't know what she saw, probably just blurs of colors, and she could not make sense of the things around her because she hadn't labeled. So we have slowly, when we were children, we don't remember, 3 years old, I don't know, when we started making sense of the world around us, categorizing, classifying, that's when we slowly made sense. This is this versus that. We differentiated. And those were man-made ideas. It's a table for me, but what is it for a fish? What is it for a dog? What is it for a cow? What is it for someone who lives in a jungle and has never seen, or on some island where they don't have tables? Certainly not a table. But to me, it seems to be screaming, I'm a table, can you see me? Right? It's almost as if, okay. So, hopefully this gives you a slight sense of what we're talking about here. And the problem is not that. The problem is not that. That is just the foundation. That's not just that. It's not so bad. But then, and someone asked this question, so when do we start to exaggerate? We already have started to exaggerate. To already, instead of perceiving these objects as me calling a table in relation to, I don't know, X, Y, and Z, now it seems to be this in and of itself. And good and bad, likewise, positive and negative, we only call it such in relation to something else. You remember yesterday, towards the end of the lesson, I told you about this experiment that Geshe Kelsang did when he said, the Buddha is bad. The Buddha is bad. Hatred is good. Okay? So the Buddha is bad because the Buddha harms something. So if something is harmful, we call it bad. If something is beneficial, we call it good. Okay. The Buddha is bad because the Buddha is harmful. The Buddha is harmful because he harms suffering. He harms suffering. He harms anger. So the Buddha is bad. Anger is good because it benefits suffering. Right? And we only say we wouldn't use it that way because we don't want suffering. We want something that benefits happiness. So therefore we say the Buddha is good because the Buddha benefits happiness, the thing we want. If we wanted the opposite, our way of relating to what is good and bad would be very different. So you see, actually it's only in relation to something else, such as a certain action, in relation to something that is short or long. I call something good or bad or long or short, and that's it. It's just for the sake of convenience. But then I'm not aware that this is why I do it, and it seems to be like that in and of itself. And then because, and really the culprit is really the sense of I. Just because my awareness perceives it from here. Therefore, you're others. I'm here. And the stronger that sense, the stronger the separation. The stronger the sense of I, the stronger the separation. One problem that arises is loneliness. Loneliness is a result of too much separating myself. If I were to see you as part of me, how would I be lonely? We're actually one big organism, right? My hand is part of my body. And that way, my hand and my leg are connected. My hand helps my leg. It's not saying, no, you're over there, sorry, you're on your own. No, it's actually assisting my leg. Because of a sense, they're part of each other. And so are we. We are part of the human family, part of this world. So I, against the rest of the world, it's just made up by the mind. The stronger my sense of I, the lonelier I am. But I can extend my sense of I. In fact, people have done it for centuries, for thousands of years. To whom do they extend it? To their children. Right? It's very interesting. My brothers and sisters, they're all having kids now. Little things that they think are so beautiful. I kind of think they're cute, but I cuddle them and then I give them back. No, I'm kidding. But it's amazing how my brothers and sisters who previously it was them. My rock climbing, my trip with the VW bus, it was like, and suddenly this little thing takes over. Right? This little child takes over because there's incredible love for this child. And suddenly it's like the I has expanded. It's amazing. It's actually possible. So this is how parents would talk. Like my mom would say, you're part of me. I go like, no. I remember when I grew up, my mom would say, oh, you're a part of me. And I was like, no, I'm not part. I'm just me. No, but there's this sense, and I get this now, that our parents feel their children, us, we are part of them. We're like an extension of them. If we were inherently I, a mother could never, or a father could never extend the sense of I to others. And the interesting thing is, so you love this child just as you love yourself. Maybe even more. And what's amazing is our capacity to love is not stretched thin, but it's multiplied. The more children you get, I used to think, well, the more children you have, 10 children, it's kind of like not that strong maybe. But what do I know? I mean, when I became a nun initially, I didn't know anything about love, etc. But then I realized I once had, someone lost their child and they had many other children. And I didn't say this to the person, I'm glad I didn't, but to someone else, well, but they have another child, And they're like, no, it's not the same. It doesn't matter. You love this child just as you love the other children. And I thought, oh my God, that's so interesting. So it's not like your love spreads thin. Your love is stronger. So that shows we can love all sentient beings. Because if you can love one child, you can love 2 children, 5, 30. I'm sure you can muster 1,000. Right? I mean, I'm sure the king of Saudi Arabia can do it. I mean, he has like 1,000 kids, right? I mean, right? That's what I heard, or at some point in time. So that's biological love. That's love, that's just biological. But then through meditation, if you realize everyone is a part of me, because actually I and other is just a creation of the mind, so you're part of me, then your happiness is just as important than mine. And I can have compassion and I can love. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama is such a good example that it's possible. So we need those examples. We have those lamas for the purpose of it's possible. It's possible. There's actually someone living this. Living, not just talking about it, not just preaching it, but living it himself. When you're in his presence, you feel so loved. You feel like you're just as important as everyone else. And that is possible. It's possible because we have the ability to do so. It shows that when we are parents, we can do it with our offspring. And the only thing that hinders us from doing it with all sentient beings is our misperception of reality, of perceiving, this is I, this is more precious, my offspring, my offspring, my offspring, yours. I don't care about yours. Okay? Right? So I limit my ability to love to maybe one child, 2 children, and I can extend it. If I have 10, I can love those equally. Of course, I may have preferences when attachment comes in. Oh, that child makes me feel better and that one doesn't. Okay, I'm not saying parents are perfectly loving at all times. We all have afflictions, of course. But in general, of afflicted sentient beings, the parents' love is the best. The least conditional, really unconditional. So it's the best example for ordinary love that is really amazing and strong. So we have all this ability biologically, right? It's just naturally we have that, but we can expand on it because that misperception is in the way. Isn't that beautiful? So this is why when we understand that phenomena are dependently existent, dependent on causes, dependent on parts or factors other than themselves, and most importantly, dependent on calling them such, therefore, they cannot exist this way in which they appear, as if in and of itself beautiful, in and of itself the prime minister, in and of itself more important than everyone else. In and of itself, I and you other. It's just a creation of the mind. And that's so wonderful because so much freedom in there. So much freedom in there. But it's so hard to understand because we have a sense there must be something there. There must be something there. It couldn't just be that we just name things from nothing. This is our difficulty. Now allow me to introduce a kind of analysis that we do. So I'll move away from dependent arising and we do this analysis of the I. I'll take you through it. You're familiar with it. But even if you're familiar with it, take it as a meditation just to go over it again. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, well, just try and just follow the process of the thoughts. It is a very popular analysis, and you find it in this book by Nagarjuna. It's on chapter 18. This is the book Geshe Damdu brought out. It's with translations of different texts and prayers. It's on page 110. Oh no, sorry, it's actually the wrong one. No, I didn't mean that one. I meant another one. It's chapter 22 on page 112. So if you look at chapter 22, 112, it talks about an analysis here, okay, and I'll leave it for now because it's not so obvious in here, but it talks about a 5-fold analysis. It's saying if you take the I, all right, and usually when we do this analysis, we need to take that which we associate with the I. Okay, so what is part of the I? Body and mind. Okay. So, if you are really meditating, you take a moment to watch your body. Take a moment, become aware of the different parts of the body. Just sweep through the body mentally and become aware of your head, your eyes, throat, your chest, your belly, arms, legs. Just kind of sweep through it. Just become aware of it. And become aware of mind, consciousness. Okay, maybe think of a moment earlier there were thoughts, doubts, I don't know, you look at things, you see colors, you see shapes, there's boredom, there's excitement, right, okay. And then you also allow yourself to get the sense of I. Okay, I'm here. Me, I, this person. Okay, a sense of I. The sense of an I that came into this room. I don't know, when was that? An hour ago? A little more than an hour ago. You came into this room, you sat down. Where is that I? Where can it be found? Now, if you've done this analysis, you go, oh, I've done that. But you really have to do it again and again. You have to do it in the space of meditation until you develop a special feeling. It moves your mind that you go, oh my gosh, I can't find it. You actually, just now, if you do it superficially, it does not really have an effect. Oh, not there. Okay, what's next? But in the meditative session, or setting, in the meditative setting, your mind is a little subtler. Because you're focused, right? If you close your eyes or you're focused in the space in front of you, so you're not distracted by things that you see, you're not distracted by sounds, so the sense perception is not as active as usually. And you're more focused with your mental consciousness because you're no longer mentally thinking about colors and shapes, etc. So your mind becomes more focused. And then you take this sense of I and you check. What is that I? Is it the same as mind and body? Is it one with mind and body, as in like identical to it, or separate from it? So separate means, does it exist as something separate, as different from mind and body? Is there like a different entity that exists separately? So it appears to exist so solidly. There's definitely an I there. But if it existed as separate from mind and body, I could theoretically remove my body, I could remove my mind, and still have an I left. How could that work? That's obviously not possible, because I identify with a certain body. The I is defined, the way I define my I is as a female. If I were to remove my body, what makes it female? What makes me female? And with my mind, certain mental qualities that I associate. I know how to speak Tibetan, for instance. That's a mental capacity. If I were to remove that, I could no longer speak Tibetan. So there'd be an I that's no longer a woman, and there'd be an I that can no longer speak Tibetan. That'd be weird. Right? So I can obviously not really separate the I from the mind and body. Then the other option, it is one. Mind and body is one. But I have so many different awarenesses, so many different body parts, but I have only one I. So what is it? Do I have many eyes? Many selves? That would be like a split personality disorder, right? Multiple personality. When you have multiple... No. I mean, there's an I that's constant, but there's a mind that is changing, different thoughts, different ideas, different moods. I'm in a good mood, I'm in a bad mood, I'm happy, I'm excited, I'm bored, right? So the I seems to be constantly there, and the mind is changing. And it's different. There's eye consciousness, so the eyes perceive something, the ear consciousness perceives something, the body consciousness is aware of something, then there's the mental consciousness. So none of those are the I. So again, I have a bit of a problem here. And if I were to say, so one is very difficult. So not the same and not different. What am I left with? And then also, is my self dependent on body and mind? Or are my body and my mind dependent on the self? I talk like that. I say, my body, implying that my I depends on the body, or vice versa, whatever it seems to imply. But actually, if they depended one on the other, then they would be separate. There's the dependent and the dependee, right? There's that, okay? There's that which depends, and that which that on which something depends, so, right? So you have those two, but they're separate again. So then you couldn't say that one is dependent on the other, such as I am dependent on my boss, or my boss is dependent on me, like different entities, like totally separate. Surely I and my boss are different. My boss may resign, and I say continue on, or the other way around. So we don't have to exist together. But I can only be there if there's a mind and body, and my mind and body can only be there if there's an I. Okay, so that wouldn't work. Dependence doesn't work. So you have already 4 points of what is called 5-point analysis. The self is not dependent on the mind and body. No, sorry. The self is not one with mind and body. The self is not separate from mind and body. The self does not depend on mind and body. And mind and body does not depend on the self. Okay, and here I'm talking about a self that is like this inherent self that I perceive, like something there that I cannot put into words, but still something there that I think is more precious than everyone else. So those 4 don't work. But I may still have a sense that the I possesses mind and body. The self possesses mind and body. And again, that doesn't work because that seems to imply like I possess a car or I possess a house or what have you. John has a car. Well, again, then would be separate. That wouldn't work. Now, those are the 5 reasonings. Self and the psychophysical complex, so the physical and the mental aggregates and the self, they're not one. They're not separate. One doesn't depend on the other doesn't depend on the one, and the self does not possess. The self does not possess mind and body. This inherent I does not possess them. So that is Nagarjuna's reasoning. He introduces in chapter 22. Except he doesn't say the I, he says the Tathagata, the Buddha. The Buddha versus the Buddha's mind and body. Okay, so but the His Holiness usually says you just take the I and exchange those words. Okay. And then Chandakirti, he adds 2 more reasonings. Chandakirti, the Nagarjuna was the great founder, or basically he set forth the teachings on emptiness. After the Buddha had set them forth, he presented them again. He introduced the different sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. He kind of reintroduced them and said, okay, so this is what the Buddha means when he taught emptiness. And he described emptiness, dependent arising, in his text, the Mula Madhyamika Karika. Very, very good text. Very, very difficult initially. Okay. Anyway, so he introduced those 5 types of reasoning. And then, I don't know, I'm not sure when Nagarjuna lived. There's some discrepancy. Some say a century before Jesus, before the birth of Christ, and some say a century afterwards. There's some discrepancy. But then around the 6th century, I believe, Chandakirti came along, the great Chandakirti, and he added 2 more reasonings. He said, okay, so we may think it's none of those 5. The self, there's not one, not different, But then people think The self is all the aggregates. The self is mind and body. It's all of them. It's the collection. Okay? It's not one with them, because one would mean they're all one, and that's bizarre. But it's the collection. So the self is the collection of mind and body. Okay. Is that true? What would be the problem if I said the self is all, is everything, mind and body? If Perry were everything, mind and body, what would be the problem? If I were to say Perry, what is Perry? Perry exists inherently because she is everything, mind and body. She's all of those. What would be the problem? Is there a problem? What do you think? Anyone? What would be the... Is there a problem? Maybe there isn't. Maybe you can say, no, Chandagirti, sorry. Number 6 works for me. If I said Perry, everyone knows who Perry is, right? Yeah, okay. So, Perry, if you can't see her, just visualize, okay? So, Perry seems to be really there. There seems to really be something called Perry. Now, one with the aggregates inherently separate, no, okay. So I say she's the collection of mind and body. Okay, I'm done. I don't need to learn about emptiness. I found the self, so... But what would be the problem? Yes? Very good. So the answer is, I'll repeat the answer for those who can't hear. No, it's not necessary, Perry. Yeah, except for if you need to see Perry just to be able to continue. I know, I'm just kidding. No, I'll repeat it. So he's saying, then you could not say that Perry is kind, because then every part, every consciousness would have to be kind. Even her kneecap would have to be kind. Everything about her would have to be kind. That's it. Very good. You could, if you say Perry is sick, everything would have to be sick. So if she just had a stuffy nose, she would have to be sick. Every part of her would have to be sick. That doesn't work. I could no longer see Perry. I only see a part of her. I don't see the collection of all the parts. When I see the outside, I don't see the inside. Right? Luckily. I mean, there's something wrong with someone seeing inside and outside. So basically, you only see one part. You see the face.
The atoms.
The atoms, right? You have to see all the atoms. You would have to see all the atoms. Inside and outside. Because that's all Perry. So I can no longer see Perry. I can no longer talk to Perry. Perry couldn't do anything. Because all the parts would have to do it. And that doesn't work. So that also doesn't work. And to say Carrie is like the way the atoms and the mind is assembled, it's that the way it's put together, well, same problem. It's all of those parts assembled in a special way. Well, same problem. So this analysis, the sevenfold analysis, you actually don't use it for the person initially. Because it's so difficult. The self escapes us. We have to deal with the mind that we don't understand. We're not used to looking at our own mind. We don't do that. We're too busy with the objects of the mind to look at our own mind, to really understand it. At least initially, it's difficult. So to look for the self among the body, that's one thing. But then to look at the mind is difficult. So usually we take other things, such as the table. Right? What makes this a table? Is this a table? Yes. Is it one with its parts, this tableness? Is it one with its parts, or is it different from its parts? If you look at it, it seems to be saying, I'm a table. Right? Seems to be not just me calling it that. No, it just is a table. And I just call it that because it is one. That's how it feels, doesn't it? It seems that I call it a table because it is one. I call it what it actually is. And I see it only because it is that object. And then if you do the same analysis, but what's very interesting, if I were to tell Perry, sorry, today Perry's very busy. She's already been so busy. And now I ask Perry to carry this table to the next room. But the door is too small, it doesn't fit. So she has to undo the table. She has to take it apart. So I'm telling her, take apart the table. But actually, the moment she removes the leg, is she taking apart the table? Well, a table is supposed to be able to stand, but if one leg is missing, it's no longer a table. And then I ask you to carry it over. And someone helps her. And she's carrying the table leg, that one leg, and another person is carrying the surface. And Perry's holding on the table leg, and then she removes it, and she holds it until she's back in the next room and puts it back on. What she's holding is the same thing. But the moment she removed it, she was not carrying a table leg. There was no table, so you can't have a leg. And then she carried it over, and the moment she reattached it, you have a table again. But she was carrying the same thing. So only if the table existed inherently, because nothing changed, she would have to have the table in her hand all the time. I touched the table. Right now I would say, when I touch the leg, I touch the table. Okay? So for those of you who can't see it, I did that. I just touched the table. I touched the table leg. Excuse me. So I touched the table leg. Okay? And then if the table existed inherently, if it was a table in and of itself, then it would not depend on anything. It wouldn't depend on anything to be a table. So I could remove it and put it back on. It would be a table at all times. The table leg would still be a table leg, even when I removed it, because it doesn't need anything to be one. It doesn't need to be assembled, and it doesn't need to be called one. It is one. Does that make sense? Okay? So this analysis helps us to actually understand that the things around us are not as solid as they seem. So we're carried away by our thoughts. It's good, it's bad, it's beautiful, it's ugly, it's I, it's others. All these things around us that we react to automatically, we never question. We never question. We never question that these things, not even our afflictions, exist inherently. Not only our anger. Because this is a little bit difficult. When you meet Buddhism, okay, chariots and tables are not as inherently existent. Okay, maybe not even the I. But my afflictions, they're a little bit more real now. And my mind is a little bit more real now. And maybe karma is a little bit more real. Those things, the Buddha, whoa, the Buddha, emptiness itself is actually very real. So our focus, that which initially seemed so real, maybe being rich or a beautiful car, okay, that exists less inherently. But now, the Buddha Dharma, the Buddha, that is really, truly, and that's where it gets quite difficult. Because we just shift what we initially perceived so strongly as existing inherently, we let go of that and just focus on something else. And that is so difficult initially, where you need to go into not just cars and the self. What about activities? What about an action of walking? Right? When you take the action of walking, where's the walking? Is it this movement, or that, or this, or that? Like lifting your leg, lifting it higher, pushing it forwards, setting your foot down again, putting your weight on that. Right? This process of walking, it is merely called walking on the basis of certain moments in time. Okay? Now, when we talk about this, we have a sense, well, then there's nothing there. If it's just label, if it's just called that, well, then there's nothing really there. This is when we go back to dependent arising. This is when we go, oh, but phenomena do exist. They exist in dependence. Okay. So let's go back to dependent arising. So I've spoken more about the emptiness. But actually, when you first hear about them, they seem contradictory. If it's empty, then it seems like there's nothing there. If you say dependently arisen, there's something there. So those seem contradictory, don't they? Actually, they're complementary. They're not contradictory, but they complement each other. So when you look at dependence on causes and conditions, there's something very fascinating. Because it seems so clear, dependence on causes and conditions. What is the classic example of a result that arises from causes and conditions? I gave you the self before, the I. A horrible person. I told you that if you think of dependence on causes and conditions, it helps you to be more compassionate. Why? Because there are all these causes and conditions that gave rise to that horrible person. So there's no inherent evil, because they're just causes, conditions that formed this person. So it's possible to truly have compassion for that person. Okay. But then we have a sense, oh yeah, there are all these causes and conditions, very solid. Cause, condition. This is where the cause starts, this is where the condition ends, this is the result. Right? It seems very clearly defined. But let's look again closer. All right? What are the causes and conditions that give rise to me now? Are they so separate as they seem? Or are they not? Because they seem very separate. Think of all the particles in this world. The food I eat. Actually, some of the particles of my body now may have been parts of your body in the past. Sounds pretty gross. But actually, it's true. Like when our body, I take the particles that make up my body. Besides the fact that when you breathe out, I breathe stuff in. And when I breathe out, you breathe stuff in. So there's a constant exchange of subtle particles. But besides that, what makes up your body may have been the body of someone else. It became, it disintegrated, it decayed. It went into the food, the particles that made up the body. It went into the food. Let's say you were buried underneath a tree. So you decayed. The minerals in your body, the particles, they were taken in by the tree. The tree took them on. The tree grew. Some of the particles became an apple. Someone comes along and eats the apple. And the nutrients in the apple become part of their body. So the parts of your body, they may have been ancient. They may have been around for thousands of years, being the parts of another person. When you think of water, this has nothing to do with part of the body, but when we think clean water, people have used it over and over. The same H2O has been used for generations. It's like using old bathtub water. Like everyone has used it to shower before in the world, and here we go, we use it once again. So the same is true for our body. It's this constant exchange. And that what I call mine, right? So just from the point of view, even now, where exactly does my body start and where does yours start? It's not as clearly defined as it seems. So my sense of I and what gives rise to my body, it's not that clearly defined, is it? So it seems very solid, but it isn't. But one of my favorites is also to look at causes and conditions. As in we have a sense, again, we bring the sense of reality in when we say causes give rise to results. So a cause develops, changes, and turns into a result. It seems very straightforward. Seems to be clearly defined. What is the classic example? You take a seed that grows into a sprout. Okay? A seed that grows into a sprout. Can you see that process in front of you? So first it's a seed, then it's a sprout. So it seems very clear. There's the result, there's the cause. But is it really true? Is it that clearly definable, or is there something more to it? So what I could now do a drawing, but actually I prefer to give you a visualization. I ask you to imagine something. Yeah, I know there's a whiteboard, but I think it's too small. So, no, it's fine. No, Sonam, it's fine. If I still need it, it's right there and I'll take it. But I'll try something else and try and see whether this makes sense to you. Visualize, because we talk so much about causes and results and causes giving rise to effects. We talk so much about it. Oh, yeah. Even that is bigger. But let me just, maybe I might hold on to it just in case. Okay. I could try, but actually the visualization is almost, okay, all right. But anyway, I try. I make a drawing. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. Now, actually, usually what I like to do is I like to give you a visualization. This doesn't mean much to you. This is the process of a seed growing into a sprout. Okay? So, slowly is this process of a seed growing into a sprout. Now, if I were to take photographs of that process, there's a little, I call that a sprout, that little thing. Maybe I add a leaf here. Okay. So, if I were to if I were to take photographs of this process from the moment the seed starts to transform, right? It grows a little bigger initially. And I take photographs every second. And I put up all these photographs in Singapore on the street. And now I'll ask you to pick the photo where it's no longer a seed, now it's a sprout. Okay? You all have to choose. This long is a seed, right? This far it's the cause, and this is where the sprout is. It seems pretty clear. If it were inherently like that, the way it seems, you would all have to pick the same photograph. You would all pick the same photograph. Maybe this one or this one. Actually, if you're close enough, you see a tiny dot here. But of course, this is just a very coarse picture. I'd have thousands of photographs in this process of taking pictures from the sprout to the... So all those moments, which is the moment when you have a sprout? Which is the moment when the seed is no longer a seed? Is there really like a clear moment? No, there's just change. There's just change. And we call it sprout at some point, but because it depends on us, it's subjective, we will not agree. We will not agree on what the sprout is, what the seed is, right? So actually every case of cause and effect, in fact, they say this process of change, what do you think? How does it work when you have a phenomenon? It arises, it stays, it remains for some time, and it goes out of existence. Is that right? Would you see it that way? Is that true? So a sprout, for instance, would you say first it arises, then it remains, and then it goes out of existence? It seems that way, right? But actually, each moment is an arising of something, a remaining of something, and a going out of existence of something. So in relation to the former moment, this has arisen. Okay? So in relation to a former moment, this has now arisen. In relation to the fact that the former moment is gone and the latter moment is not yet there, it abides. But in relation to the fact that a moment later it's gone, it's also degenerating. So it's all three. It's arising, it's remaining, and it's degenerating. Does that make sense? It's all three. It's only in relation to something else that we say it has arisen. And in relation to something else, we say it's there. Right? So it's all relative. There is no real arising first and then remaining for some time. Because actually, when we say something remains for some time, so usually we look at it on a very coarse level. We say, for instance, let's say you make a dish. Okay? You make a dish, you take a certain, rice dish, and you leave it there for too long. At some point it starts decaying and it goes out of existence. You would no longer identify as rice. So you would say, okay, during that time, first it was not there, then it's rice, and then it goes out of existence. But the moment it became rice is very difficult to define, first of all. And each moment it keeps changing. So we say that it is rice. We say it's rice. During all these moments it's changing, but each moment of rice is not the same as the one before. It keeps changing. Each moment it's different. So how can we say it remains when each moment is something different there? So Geshe Kelsang gave this explanation very beautifully. He said it's like when someone jumps off a plane, okay? So as they're jumping, falling to the earth, they're in a different spot in each moment. And still we say they're flying. They're in the air. So they're each moment in a different place, but because they are not in the plane any longer and they haven't hit the ground yet, we say they're flying. But each moment is a different person in the sense they're in a different place in the air. And still we say they're flying. Okay? So basically in each moment it's something totally different, but because it's similar enough, we talk about this person being in the air. So likewise with the rice, in each moment it's different. In each moment it's different, but we say there is rice. The rice remains. Although each moment of rice is totally different because the atoms have changed, have given rise to the next moment, and still I can say the rice is there. But each individual moment arises, and the moment later is gone, and is gone, and is gone, and is gone. And me labeling it rice, or moldy rice, or whatever, that's up to me. But it's not found there. It's just an ever-changing object. And this is true for everything. This is true for everything. When I say this is a table and that is a table, well, let's take those two, right? Those two tables. The two tables, they look the same. You have these little white tables with a stand that you can kind of fold in. So this particular table, I call this a table and I call that a table, but they're totally unique from each other. They have nothing in common. That which makes this a table, that which makes this a table, and that a table, okay, might as well, sorry. Wow, now I'm really Dharma uniform. Tables and, okay. So what makes this a table and what makes that a table, totally different. Totally different. So because they're similar enough, I say this is table and that is table. But for us it seems there's something overarching. There's something in both of them. This is where racism comes in. This is where racism comes in. Right? Okay, this is a table such and such, and because such a table does such and such, well, it's similar enough, this table must be the same. Right? We take certain similar aspects, and we see them, which actually they're really just similar, okay? And because we see them in both objects, we call them by the same name. And because we call them the same name, they're the same. Right? Okay? So this is a person from, I don't know, such and such place, right? From a certain country and they're behaving in a certain way. Because they're from that country and they're behaving that way, this person is from that country, they must also behave in that way. There I have racism. Okay? So basically, in the end, they're totally different atoms and totally different molecules that are maybe similar, in certain aspects are similar, but nonetheless totally different. Does that make sense? And I just call them that. Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. So I hope this gives you a bit of a sense, even with causes and conditions, that which seems so solidly and so clearly there. When you analyze these moments, imagine, I want to do this in Singapore, like a whole washing line with photographs of the seed giving rise to the sprout. Then it becomes clear. They're just moments in time. It's a constant change. And actually, every moment is a birth, an arising. And every moment is an abiding. And every moment is a death. And when we are so scared of death, we're just taking one moment, the last one. And we love birth. Oh, there's a little cute baby. Everyone is happy during the birth. We forget that the birth of this child is the death of something else. Because this child has just left behind something that they did before, and it's the beginning of something new. Versus the death of one person is the beginning of something new. But we just look at it from one aspect. Each moment is a birth, is a remaining, and is a death. And we're so scared of the death part. We're so scared of that, right? In actuality, it's all relative. Relative to something else, we say it has arisen, it's born. In relation to something else, it has died. In relation to something again, different, it's there. So it's all three. No contradiction. So this can be long and short, both. No contradiction. This pen that I'm holding up, it's both long and short. There's no contradiction. The only contradiction is if I were to say, this is long in relation to this and short in relation to this. That is not possible. It is not possible for this pen to be in relation to this magnetic eraser. In relation to this magnetic eraser, it cannot be both long and short. But in relation to this, it's long. In relation to something shorter, it is long. It's as simple as that. And is there any longness to be found? Other than me calling it that in relation to something else? No. That's emptiness. So, I'm I only in relation to others. But I'm not inherently I. So my happiness is not more important. In fact, I could exchange myself. I could actually become aware of your suffering, just as my mind is aware of my suffering, right? Which again is just a certain sensation I label as suffering. A certain sensation I label as happiness or suffering. In and of itself, it's neither. So I experience it as I label it suffering or happiness. Okay? And again, one day it's boredom, a certain state I am. And then if I was sick a whole week and feel the same way as the day I was bored, I'd be very happy because I feel better. Have you ever had that? Usually you feel like, oh, it's just boring, it's just normal. Then you get very sick. The first day you're better, you're so happy because the normal, the boredom state, now you know what it feels like to be sick. So it's a totally subjective judgment here. I'm glad I'm well. I'm glad I have my arms and my legs, which I usually think is just boring. I take it for granted, right? So therefore, basically I have a sense of, I perceive this and I don't go outwards. I don't perceive others. mothers can do that again. Sometimes they can feel their children's pain. It seems like they suffer with them. So it's not totally impossible to become aware of the suffering of another person. So when you are able to let go of this is I and there's others, you reach out. You become more perceptive. You perceive, you become more aware of the suffering of others, and you can truly wish them to be free from that. Which takes me to your homework. Homework for tomorrow. So it was the rejoicing part. I asked you to rejoice. That was your homework. I'm not going to check. Did you do it or not? But so on the first day, remember, I asked you to just generate compassion by trying to get an understanding of the causes and conditions that make that person who they are. Then yesterday, I asked you to sincerely rejoice in the benefit of others. Tomorrow, I want you to try to exchange yourself, to get a sense, I am that other person, right? I and other is just relative. So you try to put yourself into the other person's shoes to the best of your ability and sincerely wish them to be free from suffering, especially when there's a strong emotion. Either when you see someone really toiling hard and working hard and really try to put themselves to really get a better sense, or someone who's really obnoxious, someone that you find difficult. Try to see if you were that person, okay? Try to really get a sense, so I and others, I just switch it. Now this becomes I. The other person is I. Okay, and this becomes other. There's a whole exercise where you actually kind of put yourself next to the person, and now you're that person. And you think, I. This is I. This is other. This is other. I'm other now. Now you be quiet now. Be quiet now. This other person's happiness. And just try it out. You can actually do it. You can actually do it. I give you one other scientific experience before I start with a question, something very interesting, because we have a sense, no, this is my body. I cannot exchange my body. I'm so connected to this body, the mind, okay, it's not tangible. I could kind of visualize, I exchange it for another person. It's not as tangible. But this is my body. So this is truly mine. But there's an experiment where you put on these virtual reality goggles, and when you wear these goggles, when you look down on yourself, you're not seeing your own body, which we're used to, but you're seeing the body of a dummy, of a mannequin, like in a store. So you're just looking down at yourself, at this body. And this mannequin, this dummy, is in the next room. But when you look down, you see this mannequin, and the mannequin is also wearing a camera on the head, so obviously it's filming the body from your perspective. So you're looking down, and so what they do is they stroke the mannequin on the arm, right? And that's what you see, but at the same time, someone is stroking you. Okay? Someone is actually stroking you. So you start to associate, before long, you start to associate with this body. And then they take a knife and they cut the mannequin. And people go, and they experience pain. They say they experience pain. They experience the pain of being cut. They go, right? You need to watch it to really get a sense of it. But there you go. What we experience, pain, has to do also, I don't know whether you ever got the trick with the injection, when you get injected and the nurse talks to you really about something excited, and they're like, that's how they trick children, right? So what did you have for lunch? Do you like chocolate? Look, this is with chocolate, right? And then it's over. They never noticed they got, right? Because their attention was totally, whereas they're like, I know my nephew and nieces, they're like, they're all very little and totally focused on their finger. And I was like that. I used to scream. I was like so scared of the needle. And it was unbearable pain. Right? So it's basically because you focus so much on it, it becomes huge. So this experiment shows that we automatically connect with something if we're just having that particular perspective. So you can find it online, this experiment with the dummy. I don't remember what documentary it was a part of, but it was part of some whole documentary about optical illusions, etc. It's very easy to find nowadays. So that shows our sense of my body. It's just a matter of conditioning, right? It's just a matter of conditioning. And so a mind like his wholeness's mind is really reaching out to others. And the sense of I, in his wholeness's case, disappears. And there you have the result, a truly happy and truly effective person. Right? Okay, now I've really stretched it. Let's leave it for today, just part of the lesson. So tomorrow is our last lesson, I believe from 2 to 6. But I want to first answer this particular question, which I've been told is a question for many people here. So might as well say something about it. Very good question. So you have all the scientific aspect of Buddhism, and then you have mantra recitation, you have, what else? Circumambulation, empowerment. Okay, all right. So now I would ask the first question, does it have a scientific basis or not? What is the answer? What do you think? Of course it does. I believe all these are different techniques that are they have a scientific explanation. Now, whether modern scientists would agree with this, that's a different matter. But, science is at the beginning. It's only been 400 years. It's not that long. I'm sure with regard to mantra recitation, it's very scientific in the sense that if you recite Om Mani Padme Hum associated with Avalokiteshvara, compassion, first of all, through the repetition, your distracted mind, by doing the same thing over and over, it's easier to keep it focused. Because you're doing the same thing again and again, verbally, then it's easier to keep the mind more focused. Plus, it's Om Mani Padme Hum. It's the mantra of compassion. You're less likely to beat up your neighbor going, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani. So for the generation of compassion, reciting something that is associated with compassion, it's easier to put your mind, right? So it helps you. The recital, you recite it with your mouth and then keep focused on the mind. So you're like, you start thinking of something else and then you hear yourself go, Om Mani Padme, oh, okay. And you go back to compassion. And actually the recital itself is not enough anyway. You're supposed to generate the compassionate mind, right? It's not like, not saying that everyone does it. There's one way it's supposed to do, and then there's a way people do it. So the correct way would be to generate compassion, to really generate compassion for others, and then also recite the mantra, because in conjoined now with your compassion, the mantra actually becomes virtuous because it's conjoined with your motivation. Yeah, so you accumulate merit with your speech and your mind, but because the mind is controlling it. But so if I usually say that with prostrations, okay? When you do prostrations and you really do them mentally, it is prostrations. When you're distracted, it's exercise. Right? You're just doing exercise. It's better than not doing any movement. So at least you're doing exercise. It's not a prostration. I don't call it a prostration if you're not mentally there. If you're mentally really, I open myself. I have respect. And that is it's a sign of humility. It's like allowing yourself to receive something greater. That's because of gravity. I look at it like gravity. You want to pour something from here to somewhere else? Try to pour something in. If you hold this cup very high, you can't pour anything in. So because of gravity, that which you want to pour in, you go lower and you pour this in. So likewise, I want to learn something from those great beings. So I lower myself, as in like I open myself up to them as a sign of respect. It's good for me to stop that arrogance. I just open myself, right? And I'm open to something, to learn something. And in our society, arrogance is because of, I believe it's gravity. It's probably the law of gravity, right? That if you want to pour something, you have to lower it. So if you're full of yourself, you've got nothing to pour into me. So you put your head high. Versus if you're respectful, I have something to learn. So please bestow on me. I guess it's just something psychologically, it's helpful. That's how I look at it. That's what I teach every year I'm in Israel, because the Israelis are so scared of doing prostrations because of the idol worship. Right? So they think it's like, it's so strong. It's actually part of the Christian religion, but it's not as strong any longer. And the Jewish religion is still very strong. You do not prostrate. But it's not an idol worship. You don't worship someone. You don't do it you do it for yourself. The Buddhas couldn't care less. If it's not for them, it's you are opening yourself up to something greater. They're so pleased. You're basically saying, please teach me about compassion, about being a better person. I'm open, I'm ready. And they're like, great, finally. Right? Now I can bestow that which made me so happy on others. That's it. So it's scientific. It has a very good reason. So mantra recitation is good for the mind. It's just a crutch. Okay? I think a Buddha doesn't have to recite it any longer because there's already compassion. It's a crutch. Prostrations are it's a means and a method. Now this is just that part. Prostrations and mantra recitation. Now oral transmission. That's a difficult one. Oral transmission. Yeah. Geshe Kelsang, he once said, if you've heard it once, you've heard it once. It's already easier to understand it. Yeah, that could be one reason. Just hearing it once, hearing a text once, even if it's in a different language, there's already, even if it was in your own language, that would even be better, right? It would even be better. But if it's so in your own language, you heard it once, it makes a difference to hearing it once again. I don't think that's the only reason, but that explains something. But also the fact that it was passed down from one person to the other, to the time back of the Buddha. There's a thread there, right? There's a thread there. So if there's an unbroken lineage, the Buddha has spoken those words, and then someone else has spoken those words. And I'm sure there's some scientific reason for why this is somehow effective, but I can't tell you the reason. But I believe there's a scientific reason. I just don't know. Am I someone who goes to oral transmissions? No, not really. I don't understand the scientific reason, so I don't really do it. If I happen to be there, I don't walk out, of course, but I would not go out of my way only to receive an oral transmission. I don't think that's that important. Yeah. So also with blessings and so forth, like receiving a blessing. I don't think there is some energy that comes over. Maybe. I mean, you see, I tell you one thing. What I think is that a place can be transformed through the people who live there. I seriously believe that there are places like McLeodganj, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama lives. I had that experience. When I first came there, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about Buddhism or anything. It was just part of this finding myself. It was just between university and, that's what people did at my age. They would travel to different countries for a while, 6 months to a year, end of story, go home and start your education. It's part of gaining experience. And I just came to Dharamsala. That was my last stop. And then I was on my way home, actually, 2 weeks later. And when I came there, I felt, wow, I felt just calmer. So the place, I believe, transforms the particles, the atoms, because of the energy of our mind creates an energy. Come on, the energy of anger. I turn red. I mean, there's an energy. I wouldn't turn red when if I'm angry, I get red. Right? I get red on other times too. I get embarrassed and I turn red. But when I get angry, I can turn red. So there's an energy created. And since everything is interdependent, it would make sense that the positive energy of a person can also influence the places around us, possibly physically. There's an energy created, and since everything is based on energy, I'm very sure that it gets transformed. There's a documentary called Water, where it talks about how water can be transformed through the thoughts we have. That crystals, when you take photographs of them, when you have very positive thoughts, when you take a picture of them, they look different when you have positive thoughts versus negative thoughts. Again, the science, it needs to be checked. I don't think that science is so far that they can really research all this in all the details. We need to have a lot more refined machinery to do so. But there must be a scientific reason of certain molecules changing, and therefore it influences other people. So when you're around a very kind person, sometimes people feel it. You pick it up. When you're around a very cruel person. I give you another example. When my teacher came to Germany, one of my teachers, a wonderful teacher, my parents invited him when he was sick. And one time we took him to a concentration camp, but I forgot to tell him. There were so many people who wanted to be around my teacher, so I forgot to mention we're going to go to this concentration camp where a lot of people died during the Second World War. And he get to this place, and it was actually quite nicely done when you got there. It was whitewashed and just a huge space with like old sheds where they kept the prisoners, but it didn't look horrific from the outside. And he said, "This is a terrible place. Oh, it gives me the creeps. What is this place?" And I was like, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, it's a concentration camp." And he said, "Oh, that explains it." So he picked up on it. So much suffering was inflicted on people there. And because he's a meditator, he's very sensitive to energies around him. He's a great practitioner himself. And he picked it up. He's like, "This gives me the crease. It's terrible here." But I forgot to tell him. So he couldn't have known. And it was unexpected because it was in the east part of Germany. We visited someone there. And in the morning, they had the idea to go there. So I didn't tell him in advance. And in that moment, I didn't tell him. I forgot. Okay? So there you go. So some people pick up on that. If you have the sensitivity, and the less we grasp at the self, and the less we are busy with ourselves, the more we pick up. Okay? All right. And then the last one is the oracles. They're sentient beings. They're sentient beings. When I was in Dharamsala, there was a long life puja for His Holiness, and Kandula, you've heard of Kandula? She's also been here. Has she been here? To Singapore?
Not to TV.
But to Singapore. Yeah, so she has been to Singapore. She is this oracle, or this medium for an oracle. And she went into trance when they did this long life puja. And so did Nechong. And it was a small place we sat in, so it was very close to, you could see it very easily. And it was like, wow, these beings there. But it just gave me a sense they're just different kinds of beings. I mean, they're different realms. So Nechong is just a different kind of being. And His Holiness doesn't need Nechong. But out of compassion for Nechong, because of Nechong being this being, not a human, but in a different realm, protecting the Tibetans, right? Having pledged. He's been around since Guru Rinpoche. I mean, come on, we read about this in the text. There are these long life celestial beings. And I mean, here in Singapore, I don't think people have a problem or maybe I have a problem believing it. I don't know. I totally believe this. There's so many other realms of existence. And just because we don't see it, it doesn't mean they're not there. Right? I believe that there are houses where there are spirits in, and sometimes people see them and other people don't. What I'm trying to say is that there are these beings who live all around us. And so there's one called Nechong who has been protecting the Tibetans since Padmasambhava. And His Holiness he has so much faith for His Holiness. He was like bowing to His Holiness again and again, again and again. So much respect. And out of his compassion, he's a disciple for His Holiness. So if he makes a prediction, he accumulates a lot of merit, and His Holiness lets him be. Of course, His Holiness is compassionate towards others. And then Kandula also went into a trance. And she asked His Holiness to remain for a long time. I have good news. His Holiness says, I heard, and I asked the people around me, did you hear the same thing? His Holiness said, 100 years. And we were like, 100 years? His Holiness just said, yes, I heard 100 years. And then later on, His Holiness actually gave a small speech. And he said, he's just heard in South China, there's some people who live to a very old age. The oldest was 130, and another was 117. And he said, if someone works for the benefit of others, it makes sense to have a long life. Well, there's a prediction. I live to the age of 113. Yeah. We were always like, how old am I going to be when His Holiness is 113? Everyone was doing the math. No, of course, you want someone around like His Holiness for a long time. No, this is a whole different story. This is just the good news part, if you're regard His Holiness as your guru. But the point is that His Holiness has compassion for those beings. They're just like us. They have a right to be there. They are there. And they sometimes communicate with us through this medium. Because His Holiness may see them, but we don't see them. So I believe, to me, it was like there's just another living being, very powerful. Wow, it was really, there was a presence in the room. But through Kandula, in that case, or through the Nechung medium in the other case. So, scientific. Just we exist, they also exist. They talk to us. And the fact that Nechung, I hope I tell you the right thing, but I remember reading about this. You know, when the oracle comes, when this big being, I mean, oracle is just the English word. It's not in Tibetan oracle. In Tibetan, it's the name of a certain being. So when this being enters the medium, who just happens to have the right kind of energy vessels that can accommodate this being, because he is so powerful, they put on this 20-pound head, and they tie it very strongly around his very toughly around his throat, like very tightly, because otherwise he's too powerful. So to keep him grounded. And if the oracle goes, the monks have to watch, because if they don't untie it, the medium will suffocate the moment this being is gone. Because he has so much power, he can still breathe with this very tight knot at his throat. But the moment the oracle leaves, they have to untie it, otherwise they kill the medium. So I mean, you can see it. It goes, and the head is gone. I saw it myself. And then the medium is like a piece of wood, totally stiff. I mean, try to do that. Be so stiff that you're carried around by 6 people. He was just out of it. He was carried out like a piece of wood. His whole body was cramped. So there was a being there, just like us. So one day science may have those machines that they can perceive those beings that are all around us. So I think to me, that's very scientific. And if there's no scientific answer, I wouldn't do it, if it doesn't make sense. So what we call miraculous powers are just things that we cannot do. I mean, this is a miraculous power. This little device, 500 years ago, you could have been burned as a witch for carrying this around. Right? It's miraculous that you can do this. I mean, take your cell phone. It's miraculous. But now, no longer, so in relation to everyone now having it, it's no longer called miraculous. 500 years ago, it would have been miraculous. It's all relative. Okay? It's normal now.
How about the power of holy objects? How does that work?
The power of holy objects. Yeah, that's again, I don't know. I believe that the structure of an object has slightly changed. So, have you ever heard of the Jerusalem syndrome? Jerusalem is the holy city. Because for many generations, people have worshipped in that place, have generated faith, have fought over the city, of course, that too, but mainly there's been a lot of the energy of faith has been created over and over. And the Jerusalem syndrome is that people go a little bit loopy sometimes in that city. So somehow the energy there, to some very sensitive people, they kind of lose it for a day or two. And when they leave Jerusalem, they're fine. I don't know. I mean, if we had a way in measuring those objects, I'm sure we would find they still have H2O and they still have these molecules that other objects have, but it might have slightly changed, right? And so therefore, it's the power of the mind. It has transformed those objects. I totally believe that. Please, maybe if you find it helpful in this documentary called Water, it's quite interesting. Yeah, well, they only mention this Japanese, but they also mention some Russian. They talk about why it is healthy to bless your food. If you generate gratitude and like a positive state of mind, faith and gratitude for the food, it seems to slightly change the structure of the water inside it, and it's healthier. So, and they explain what happens exactly, that there's this theory that with the power of the mind, especially with liquids, and every object has some liquid in it, right? I mean, otherwise it would fall into dust. So even this table is held together by certain liquid, because it's got some flexibility, so that this can actually be affected by our mind. So I don't know how scientifically based that documentary is, but it makes a lot of sense. It's quite interesting. Yeah. So, like I said, I believe the power of our mind. I mean, there's so many examples, and I'm sure you can come up with some, where some objects are transformed through the mind. I mean, just generating compassion, you feel better. Generating compassion, you feel physically better. You feel calmer. If it can make this whole body calmer, why could it not also transform the objects around you? Okay? So I think it's all scientific. Yeah. And it's good to understand the why. It's good to understand why. Because if you don't understand why, you're doing a lot of exercise, but you're not doing prostrations. And I mean, it's a good exercise, but there's other exercising too. So, does that answer that question?
Yes.
Okay, to some degree. I mean, definitely you still have, and you should ask others too. I don't have any answer to it. This is just my personal opinion. Yeah. Okay. Ooh. Do we have time for another question, or? No, maybe we'll leave it as such. It doesn't seem desperate. More like desperate, let's go home. No. We have time also tomorrow. I mean, I would take another question, but it is, what time is it? 9:30? My watch doesn't.
So we can write on a piece of paper.
Yeah, so if you want to do that, that's a good idea. So for tomorrow, if you would like to ask a question and you don't want to do it in front of others, you could leave a piece of paper on the table. Depending on how many questions there are, I'll make more time. Okay? So we've basically gone through the 3 types. Oh, you have a question? Okay. Yeah, you have a question, please.
Okay, a short one because I also want to go home. So I have a request because you have been talking about bringing what we learn from intellectually to our heart. Mm-hmm. So I'm requesting whether tomorrow you could lead a meditation using dependent arising, because I understand that dependent arising is the king of reasoning for the realization of emptiness. Yeah, if you can. Thank you.
All right. How many hours do we have tomorrow? We have 3, right?
3.
3. Okay, 3. All right. So I think that's a good idea to do a meditation. Okay, I'll prepare some guided meditation usually what I do when I have enough time, I started doing this now, that I teach for like half an hour and we meditate. Then I teach for half an hour and we meditate. But that is when I usually have 6 hours a day to teach. And then it's too much, 6 hours of talking. But tomorrow, since it is 3 hours. Okay, so I'll do meditation. We'll go through everything I've done. I'll lead you through a meditation as a kind of conclusion. Okay, yeah. And you also asked for that. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it was actually, I forgot about that. Very good. Okay, so let's leave it for tonight. Let's